Welcome to Leadership Rediscovered. I'm your host, Laura Siebold, and I am so thrilled today to be joined by a podcast host that I have been loyally following and subscribed to for many years, Meg Rentschler. And I'd love to read Meg's bio to you, and then she can bring it to life in our conversation here. But Meg Rentschler is a clinical social worker and professional certified coach. She's been teaching and been a part of mentoring professional coaches since 2008. She has over 30 years experience in service delivery as a psychotherapist and an executive coach, and understands the importance of wellness in mind, body, and spirit to the wholeness of the person. In her company, A Focus on Results Executive Coaching, Meg has worked with leaders in a variety of industries, including healthcare, education, manufacturing, finance, and transportation, to create healthier work environments through honoring each person's contribution and unique value. In the desire to further the education and development of coaches and leaders, Meg created a weekly talk show in 2016. The STAR Coach Show, which is an acronym for Strategies, Tools, and Resources, offers guidance on skill and business development to coaches around the world and helps leaders use coaching principles to strengthen their effectiveness. Meg teaches and mentors in 2 coaching certification programs, the University of Texas at Dallas since 2008 and Coach Academy International since 2016. She earned her Bachelor of Science from Michigan State University and her Master of Social Work from the University of Michigan. Meg attended the University of Texas at Dallas for her executive coaching certification. She lives in North Texas, which is why we're Zooming today, with her husband of 37 years. And they have 2 adult sons and their dog, Coda. And I will have your links in our show as well, Meg, so that people know how to get a hold of you.
That's beautiful. Laura, thank you so much for having me on your wonderful podcast so that we can talk all things leadership and just connect with one another.
Yes, I'm so thrilled. I'm so excited. Again, I have been listening to your Star Coach show for years, and I started on it as a coach because I was trying to get resources and tips from a coaching perspective. But your audience is not just coaches. You have leaders that listen to your podcast as well. And just given your role that you've worked with leaders for so long, that was one of the many reasons why I was excited to have you on Leadership Rediscovered. And so I thought, before we start talking about all the work you've done with other leaders, I'd like to get to know you as a leader. So if you don't mind, just take us through your leadership journey.
Absolutely. So, I began my career as a very young social worker in inner city Detroit, working with families and children to help them be healthier. And so even at that point, it's a big belief of mine that you don't have to have a title of leader to be a leader. We're all invited into that space to share our leadership, to share our perspective. And so even as a social worker working with families in inner city Detroit, it was that opportunity to be a leader to my other therapists in the organization. As I was working on my master's at Michigan, and for anybody who was like, wait a minute, she went to Michigan State and Michigan? Yeah, I hear that a lot. And they are big rivals.
Yes.
If anybody is interested, yes, if they're up against one another, I'm a Spartan at heart. I think that you really kind of go with where your undergrad is, I think, and that's where I met my husband and all that stuff. But when I was at Michigan, I thought, I want to be an administrator as a social worker. I want to really sort of help deliver programs, and then really got bit by the clinical bug and was like, no, I want to be, because I believed I would be a better leader if I had actually done the clinical work first. So I went into clinical practice. My husband was then transferred to Texas. And for a year, I told him, we are not moving to Texas. And for a year, he kept saying, at this point now, if we don't go to Texas, I have to get a different job. So are we going to move with the company, or am I going to get a different job? So I came to Texas. Now, I don't want to offend anybody in Texas, but I was a Michigander. I just thought, that was where I was going to grow up with all my siblings and that my kids were going to know their cousins. Well, God sometimes has a different plan, or large corporations have a different plan. I don't know, but we moved to Texas, and then really was my first formal leadership role, in that I was hired by a psychiatric hospital to lead a adolescent psychiatric unit as their assistant program director, really over the clinical aspect of the program. And from there went into private practice. So I've been a business owner since 1990, first as a psychotherapist, and for many, many years as a psychotherapist. And that's really where I began to be able to engage with leaders also around their struggles. We'll talk more about that in a bit, but it was that experience in working with leaders who were stressed out and overwhelmed and in therapy because they didn't feel like they'd been given the tools they needed to be a leader. They were a great individual contributor, so let's make you a leader.
Yeah.
And then, they're now leading people who come with a plethora of issues, and they're like, I don't know how to lead. So they were stressed and coming to therapy for that. Or I had people who were coming to therapy because they were being led by people who didn't value who they were as contributors to the organization. So that's when I decided, and I really believe that as leaders, as human beings on the planet, all trying to do this together, that we need to be tapped into, what do I need at the moment? Am I being my best? And I realized I was beginning to be worn down by this consistent struggle and you might think, well, as a therapist, you work with people who have struggles. Yes, I do. And I had done that for over 20 years. And when you begin to see that it is a systemic issue, and the systemic issues seem to be that organizations were not supporting their people to be healthy, I thought, I need to do something different. That's when I began to do research, found executive coaching, thought, oh, how could I be a better leader by going into organizations and helping their executives and their leaders empower their people, create healthier environments? Maybe that's a better use of my time than being reactive in the therapy standpoint and helping people put it together after they've been torn down. So that's what happened. That journey for me began in 2006, 2007. And then I got my executive coaching certification in 2007, 2008. And then you never know where a window's going to open, right? So I thought, I'm going to create a difference in organizations by going in. And then before I was even done with my program, I got approached by the director, and he said, I would love for you to join faculty when you're done with the program.
Wow.
And I thought, well, I don't know that teaching was really sort of on my radar. Then I got to thinking, if I want to make organizations healthier, what better way to do that than to help coaches effectively coach? So now, instead of just Meg going into organizations, I mean, and it's not like it was just Meg anyway. I know there was many coaches doing that, but I was invited into creating a difference by helping coaches really effectively coach. So at this point, I've had the honor of mentoring, teaching, and helping coaches lift up their businesses, over probably close to 2,000 coaches at this point. Who would have? So just think of the ripple effect from that.
Yes. Yeah. People like me who have learned so much by listening and then been able to leverage those tools and the strategies and everything else with other people. So you're right. It's not just the direct listeners, it's all the people that they're interacting with too.
Right. And then just boom, 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 it goes out. Yeah. And to your point, along that journey, coaches would come to me and say, Meg, could you help me with this? And could you help me with that, beyond the programs that I was teaching in? And once again, let's lean in and think about, what do I need to do as a leader to be most effective? I need to create a different resource, inventing the wheel, coach after coach. When you're leading over 100 coaches a year, that doesn't make logical sense. That's where the podcast came into being. How can I create a resource that helps lift the profession, helps lift leaders, so that instead of trying to have individual conversations around specific needs, it can become, you know what? Why don't you listen to episode number whatever? Because that's going to give you some great fodder for what you need. And then if you need more, go ahead and reach out. But it just makes it so much more effective across the board.
Yeah, I love that. It's interesting, when I was listening to you first talk about that transition between your psychotherapy practice to coaching, I was thinking about, I believe it's Desmond Tutu. I might accidentally butcher the quote, but it's something about, instead of pulling people out of the river, we should go upstream and figure out what's causing them to fall in the first place.
Yes.
And so I was like, oh, that's kind of what Meg did. But then it was like you went even further upstream in that scenario and thought, I'm just going to start all the way at the top here.
I just really want, because I believe, and this is part of my leadership journey, I truly believe that we all have the capacity to engage with one another differently. Yeah. And that the principles of that are covered by coaching principles. Are we really interested in other people? Are we listening to what they have to say? Or are we just listening to respond and share what we want to share? Are we, genuinely invested in people being whole and resourceful and creative? Like, do we really believe that? Or are we just kind of spouting that? And so when we can make a decision that we're going to have a different kind of conversation, and all of us are going to do the lifting together, how much more powerful is that than I'm going to come in and rescue you as the leader and do it better than you anyway? And no, how can I empower you to do that so that we all lift together?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't help but think your psychotherapy background can only help to enhance the leaders that you're now working with, the coaches that you're working with. What was that transition like for you? Because there are a lot of people that try to really understand the differences between therapy and coaching, and then there are individuals who are and have been both. And so I'd love to hear your take on that as well, and just what that transition was like for you.
Right. The transition wasn't as difficult for me as we might imagine. And I think that part of that has to do with what kind of psychotherapy were we doing? So I have always been kind of solution focused and looking at, let's talk about what skills and strengths you bring to the table. And let's not look at you as broken, but as, needing new resources, needing to tap into what your natural strengths are. Whereas some therapy models are more like, let's fix you, let's build you up kind of thing. So I think part of that, and very truthfully, I think that that's what led the director of the program to say, could you create a cognitive coaching model based upon all the cognitive therapy that you've done? Because a lot of what we do as coaches leans into what we like, the principles or the foundation pieces of that are from empirical data that goes way back in psychotherapy. It's just how we do it and tweaking it, and that we're not diagnosing our clients. We're not leaning into, let's fix what's broken. We're not leaning into, let's go in and just, dig out every past experience and analyze how you responded to that. As much as, what can we learn from your past? Because I have yet to work with a client who was hatched yesterday. I mean, we've all had a path that we've walked, and that path does influence the way that we're showing up today. And yet, we don't necessarily need to look for the blame, the cause, the client. The client has all that information in them. So hopefully what we can do is help them sort of harvest what's important for them and apply it to their solution, versus I need to get in there and know every inch about the story and know every detail, because I don't necessarily, to help you find the solution, I don't necessarily need to know all those details.
Right.
So that was one thing. Now, one thing I did have to, I think as a therapist, I was probably quicker to offer
Mm.
not necessarily solution, because I think that harvest, I'm a farm girl from Michigan, so
I love it.
harvesting from the client, understanding what's going on
Yes.
from them. I might have been more directive as a therapist than I am as a
Mm-hmm.
coach. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not positive about that. I'm not going to go back and interview all my old, therapy. But my guess is I was quicker to jump in and
Yeah.
offer than I am now as a coach. Now, that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that I won't as a coach
Right.
offer, but it's always offering. That might even be a difference. I offer without attachment as a coach, and I was probably more attached as a therapist, because
Mm-hmm.
often the things I was recommending or encouraging had to do with keeping people from being suicidal, or keeping people from
Yes.
self-harm, or keeping people. So, it wouldn't be just a suggestion if they needed
Right.
to go inpatient. It would be let's talk about next
Yes.
steps for
We
you.
need to. Yeah.
Yeah,
And you're directing those next steps more
right.
than you would in a coaching
Yes.
conversation. That totally makes
I
sense.
think the
But
stakes are different.
for sure. But
Yeah.
I just think what a gift to have had those conversations initially with leaders, with executives, with individuals coming from the workplace, because you got to see firsthand how it was truly impacting their whole life. I mean, I can't help but think about, there was an article that I read recently that really was detailing the impact that a toxic leader or someone who actually the study was looking at basketball coaches and NBA coaches, but they were
Mm-hmm.
tracking, I don't know if you've heard of this or followed it, but they were tracking toxic or abusive leadership behaviors and the impact that it had on these basketball players from their college experience all the way into the NBA. And for some of them, the lasting impact was 10 years
Wow.
beyond when they last had their interaction with that person that displayed toxic or abusive leadership. And so to me, I think a lot of times I don't know of any leaders who are actively trying to be terrible at being
Right.
leaders or would identify themselves as toxic or abusive
Right.
or not effective. Maybe they're willing to say I'm not effective, but the problem is where there's a lot of people who are, from a perception perspective, experiencing that or feeling that in terms of the interaction. So I just think how helpful it might be for you to have that information already and
Right.
and knowing what the impact is on people, as well as the stress that a leader might be under, and just how you can carry all of that into your coaching conversations too.
It has been helpful. And I will tell you, one of the other key things, Laura, is that I'm not afraid to step into emotion, or I'm not like,
Mhm.
what I hear consistently as a coach instructor and mentor coach is, I don't know what to do with those emotions. I don't know, and it's like, so I'm going to either step over them and pretend like they weren't put out there,
Yeah.
or try to fix them, or tell them that everything's going to
Mhm.
be okay. So I think we either get triggered into avoidance or rescuing. And I don't think either of
Mhm.
those are the most effective way to deal with emotions. Are human. We're going to have
Yes.
emotions. Our clients are going to have
Yes.
emotions. So how do we make space for that as a coach without feeling a need to fix, make go away, you
Yeah.
know, and that it's okay that there's a lot of intense emotions that can
Yeah.
happen and that doesn't mean they need a therapist.
Right.
Situations cause emotions,
Mhm.
um and so how do we meet our clients where they are? So that's been because I've been invited to conversations that many of you would probably never believe that I've had those kind of
Uh-huh.
conversations with people, but it's just
Uh-huh.
part of being a therapist.
Mhm.
And then
So
ultimately being able to do that as a coach.
yeah, it's so interesting though that coaches are saying that they might be uncomfortable with someone expressing emotion, because I hear a lot of managers and leaders saying that they're uncomfortable with their employees expressing emotion. And I know this was something I wanted to talk about anyway, so maybe we'll just do a quick segue
Yeah.
into this topic. But I know you did work as a certified critical incident responder, where you were going in and leading teams through traumatic situations. Is that correct?
Hmm. That is
I'd
correct.
love to hear any information you're willing to share about what that experience was like, because you're going in, I would imagine, in some of the worst workplace scenarios, things that none of us are likely prepared for or have training on in terms of the behavioral side of how do
Right.
you deal with it. So I'd love to hear anything you have to share on that.
Yeah. So I had the honor of doing critical incident debriefing work for, gosh, probably 15, 20 years. I don't remember exactly how long I did it. And you do need to be kind of certified as a critical
Mm-hmm.
incident debriefer. So if people are like, well, what kinds of things would you get called in on? Well, if there was an employee death on site, or a robbery, or a industrial accident, or sometimes it was, maybe the employee didn't die on site, but there was a
Mm-hmm.
coworker who died, so that would be grief and loss, right?
Wow.
Um, so that's a lot to put on a leader to lead their team through something like that, without,
Yes.
because they are also, and this is something I'd really lean into with the management team, you're
Mm-hmm.
experiencing your own emotions through this. You
Yeah.
have experienced the loss as well. Often there, if it is something that is creating a ripple effect through, let's say, earnings, or, so
Mm-hmm.
they've got the managerial piece that they've got to look
Yes.
at, but also the emotional and
Mm-hmm.
traumatic impact of that. So when you go into an organization, you're dealing with, how can I help the managers help their people? And
Mm-hmm.
then you're dealing directly with the most impacted employees.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I would just encourage anybody to think about, if they're being, if you're just in a place where some traumatic event has occurred,
Mm-hmm.
one of the most healing aspects of that is to help people think through what actually occurred versus all the what ifs that tend to spin off of a
Mm.
traumatic event. The best
Mm-hmm.
example for that is, I've done, I think, hundreds of debriefs around bank robberies. Now, you might think, seriously, Meg, there's that many bank robberies? There are a lot of bank
Scary.
robberies.
There's a lot of
Um,
banks, but there's also a
yeah,
lot of bank robberies.
there's a lot of bank robberies. And
Oh my
and
gosh.
normally, I mean, in the scheme of things, they're not like Ocean's 11 kind of bank
Right.
robberies. They tend to be in a some branch somewhere, could be a tiny branch,
Mm-hmm.
could be and that somebody comes in usually with a note
Yes.
and asks
A
for
little
money
more
for the note.
subtle.
It's a little more subtle.
Yeah.
They might or might not threaten that they have a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, I mean, I've done full out where somebody got shot kind of ones,
Oh
but
my gosh.
usually they are a note passing. The teller gives the money from the their drawer, and the person
Mm-hmm.
leaves, and they're usually in and out in 30 seconds,
Wow.
or whatever. But this
Yeah.
is so that's what actually happened. Now, does that mean
Yes.
it's trauma? Yes, it's trauma. Is that like
Uh-huh.
something that makes us feel unsafe in our work environment? Absolutely.
For sure.
And when I would work with the team, we would start with, where were you what was happening for you when you realized what was happening? So a
Mm-hmm.
good bank would bring everybody from that branch in, whether they were off that day, or so that everybody
Oh,
gets debriefed, because you are impacted whether you were there or not,
yeah.
because it
Wow.
was your branch. So we would start with sort of exploring, okay, Fred, where were you? Well, I was the teller next to the teller that got robbed. So I
Mm-hmm.
realized when she turned to me and said, oh my God, I've just been robbed. Or
Mm.
the person who got the note, what was that experience like for her? The person
Yeah.
who got the phone call that said, our branch was just robbed. Can you do a debrief
Yeah.
tomorrow at 10? So you go through and you sort of talk to everybody. The reason why I'm sharing this is that what that does is it sort of starts with the facts rather than the what ifs. And
Mm-hmm.
because what is very common is that we escalate into all the, well, what if he'd had a gun? What if he killed me? What if my children are now without a mom
Yes.
or without a dad? And
Yes.
so, and helping the leaders ground people back into what actually happened. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
other great thing that great banks would do, and there were some great banks that I would work with, they would immediately bring in all of the leaders all the way up the chain. So the bank leader, the regional leader, the district
Mm-hmm.
leader, they would come to support that team, HR
Wow.
leaders.
Yeah.
And so what that shows is that we appreciate the work that you're doing in this. It is a industry that is a little fraught with risk because we're working with money, or
Right.
industrial accident, that we get that
Mm-hmm.
you're working with some risk here.
Mm-hmm.
And what we want to do is allow people to express the facts, then express the emotions, and
Mm-hmm.
express, what do I need moving forward? How can we
Mm.
support one another? And doing something like that, is a role models for the leaders. How can I be here
Yes.
for my people? And
Yes.
then it begins to take that, what could bubble up, deal with it, let people talk about it. Is there
Yeah.
still fear about going back to work? Absolutely. Is
Mm-hmm.
there still discomfort or grief or loss or whatever is there? Yes. And yet there's this incredible, we cared enough about you to bring somebody
Mm-hmm.
in. It allows the leaders to get a little bit of that off their shoulders so that they can turn it over to a professional, see the
Yes.
way that it's done. And then it was not unusual that I would meet with leadership teams, talk with them about how they're doing, what they needed, because sometimes that's different than what the employees need. But
Yeah.
the whole focus of that is, how can we care for everyone and then help
Mm-hmm.
you get back to life, even though, and
Yes.
normalize the fact that it's not going to feel the same to come back to work on Monday as it, but
No.
yet in time will begin. Time is an incredible healer.
Well, and it's interesting too because I love that you use the word grounding, and that's what I was thinking about as you were talking, is that grounding element of, okay, instead of our inclination to start snowballing in our brain, and then that can very quickly put us into very panicky, hysterical thoughts and feelings and expressions, to be able to take a step back and just get people to focus on something very concrete and specific around, let's talk about the facts of the experience that just
Mm-hmm.
happened. And it's also acknowledging everybody's individual experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just kind of thinking about, as leaders are engaged in various situations, could be workplace trauma or just some sort of crisis or just
Or
disruption to
even
the
a
business.
disruption to a project or something. Well, what's happening for you?
Exactly.
What's happened? Like, that becomes,
Yeah.
as everybody listens to everybody share their perspective, it's like,
Right.
oh, I hadn't realized it from the, it's just seeing, you can actually feel it come down in the room.
Yeah. Well, that acknowledgement piece I think is so huge. And
Mm-hmm.
then once you kind of, I think being able to start with more of the fact-based experience certainly helps
Mm-hmm.
from a more rational perspective, but then but you're also still able to process the emotional side of it too, which I think is also important. I think maybe a leader might feel more comfortable knowing, okay, I'm allowed to talk about the facts first and then I can
Exactly.
get into the
Yeah.
feelings. Yes. But also
We
you
always
can
want to
still
give
acknowledge,
tools to make it easier. Yes.
yeah, you can still acknowledge the feelings and recognize that each person might be feeling something different.
And it is okay. So what do we do when somebody feels something? We just
Yeah.
tell them, take your time.
Yeah.
I'm just going to be here with you. I'm not going to try
Hmm.
to fix it. I'm not going to tell you it's going to be okay. I'm not going to, I might ask you, so what do you need next? What do you need in
Yes.
this? Versus feeling responsible to make it go away, We can't make it go
Yes,
away. We want, and it's not
exactly.
even actually respectful to try to make it go away because maybe that
Hmm.
person doesn't want it to go away. Maybe, and this
Right.
is the other thing, just as a little footnote to what we were talking about regarding trauma in the workplace.
Hmm.
You never know who was triggered into something that happened recently in their life or a past
Yes.
memory in their life. So it was not unusual for a manager to kind of pull me to the side and say, I don't know what's happening with so and so because they weren't
Mm.
even here that day and they are more upset than anybody else. And anytime I did a
Hmm.
critical incident, after we did the group thing, I would go somewhere where individuals would can be able to come and talk with me.
Yeah.
Um, so at that, it would be, yeah, I didn't really know Joe who died very well. However, my brother-in-law just passed, a month ago, and I haven't really
Mm.
processed that. Or so the leaders are sometimes in a place of, I don't know what's going on with this person.
Yes.
Often it's because none of us live in a cylinder. We live in this in a rich environment. Yes, we spend more time with our work colleagues usually during a week than we do our family
Yeah.
members. And yet we're all in many systems, and so we don't know what might be happening for somebody based upon something that's outside of the work environment.
Yeah, but I think that's such an important point too, because you're right. As a leader, you might be experiencing employees who suddenly are acting very out of character for or out of their standard operating procedure for them in terms of how they show up to work every day. And we're quick sometimes, I think, to make assumptions or interpret without, trying to actually think through what are the possible options. It could oftentimes have nothing to do with you as a leader. They're not necessarily reacting to you, maybe, but to something that's been triggered within them. And we don't know that. I mean, people don't usually carry around a list on their
Right,
shirt of here's
exactly.
all the trauma I've experienced in my life. And, some people are more vocal about it. And it's not even about finding out what that is, but just maybe having a little bit more empathy or an ear
Right,
towards more empathy around maybe there's something else going on
right,
here, and how can I best support this
right.
person?
And you bring up such a good point. Consistently, before, wrapping up any kind of a critical incident debrief, you
Mm-hmm.
let you let everyone know what kinds of things might happen. So
Yeah.
we're all here for one another. So if you're seeing a change in somebody's behavior,
Mm-hmm.
something is very different from the way that they would normally operate, the way that they would normally engage,
Mm-hmm.
alert, reach out to that person and
Yeah.
just let them know that you're concerned. Let the leader know, because that person
Mm-hmm.
might need a referral to an employee assistance program, or
Right.
to, because we don't know what's going on. Be curious if they want, you don't have to share with me, but here's what I'm
Yes.
seeing and I'm concerned about this. Um,
Yes.
because that's the way that our system sort of begins to show. We shift in behaviors, we change in the way
Mm-hmm.
that we engage. We might be more irritable than usual, or might be
Mm-hmm.
more withdrawn than usual. And if we're dealing with our own stuff and we go within it, when our coworkers care enough to say, I've noticed a shift, we might not even think that other people notice, which is going to make us feel more isolated and more withdrawn. So
Yeah.
so that's a
Yeah.
great point you bring up, Laura.
No, and I'm glad you said that as well, because you're right. I think that is part of the role of a leader, as well as being a part of a team, is looking
Right,
out for each other, taking the time. It does require an investment in building a relationship with
right,
someone, first of all, but to me, that is the role of a leader, is to establish
right.
that relationship, build that trust, and as well as being a teammate as well, looking out for people, recognizing, that, gosh, Meg always comes in so, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed every day to work. And for the past 2 weeks, not seeing that out of Meg anymore. And I wonder what's going on, and not being judgmental or critical, but out of pure kindness and caring and compassion for someone else. Hey, Meg, I've
Right.
just noticed that you're coming into work every morning, differently than how you typically do. And I just, want to check in on you and make sure that you're
Mhm.
doing okay. And like you said, they
Yeah.
don't want to share, they don't have to share, but at least they know
But it's
somebody
huge to know that
cares.
they're not invisible.
Yes, I see you and
Hmm.
I'm
And I
noticing.
care.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Wow. All right. I feel like I could have a whole sidebar on that, but I'll move along too. I have so many questions for you.
This conversation was just too good for one episode. So join us next week for part 2.